You are listening to GeekFest Rants on the IC Robots Radio Network.
You have located GeekFest Rants, the entertainment podcast for genre geeks like you.
Shall we play a game?
Covering the world of vintage and current film and television since 2010.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Featuring in-depth conversations on sci-fi, horror, fantasy, comics, toys, and conventions.
So say we all. So say we all.
And now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show.
Who is it?
Banzai! Daniel LaRusso here for LaRusso Auto. We are chopping prices on all of our inventory. Johnny? I knew it was you. This is Johnny Lawrence. He and I go way back.
Oh, this is the guy whose ass you kicked.
If you want to get technical, I kicked his face.
Hey, where you going, come in?
Oh, I didn't know you guys were trying to buy beer.
Hey! Watch your car, man. Get the hell out of here, loser.
Was that like Taekwondo or something?
It's karate.
Do you think you could teach me?
I'm driving home from work yesterday, and in the strip mall, I see... After 30 years, I thought that guy might have changed, but it's still the same prick. I heard you beat up a bunch of teenagers.
I didn't beat up any teenagers. I kicked the crap out of a bunch of assholes who deserved it.
Thinks he could bring Cobra Kai back to the valley? Yeah. Not on my watch.
You want those kids at school to keep dumping things on your head? You want all the girls to think you're a wangless dork?
You're gonna be my karate teacher?
No. I'm gonna be your sensei. I'm gonna teach you the style of karate that was taught to me. A method of fighting your pansy ass generation desperately needs.
Okay, let's see what you got.
She's a girl.
And?
I'm sorry.
Are you okay?
Girl's a natural cobra.
Johnny, you and I, we aren't done.
Hi everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perron, and today we are going to be doing some film and television show reviews. We are going to start off with A Quiet Place, new horror film that we've seen recently that kind of snuck up, on everybody. Pretty good job that they did on it. Then we're going to follow up with Avengers Infinity War. This is a big monster hit, if you will. Very eagerly anticipated genre film. Puts together just about everything that we've seen so far in these new Marvel films into one big team up to fight the biggest baddie they've seen so far. Then from there, we're going to hop over to Netflix to go over Lost in Space, the reboot remake of the original 60s classic, later to be a 90s forgettable film, now comes home. What a wonderful new sci-fi series. We're going to take a look at that. And then we are going to go to YouTube Red with Cobra Kai. Boy, another hit from the past. It's the television series from The Karate Kid, the original Karate Kid film. We get to visit these characters a very long time later and what their lives had turned into. Another surprise hit. Very entertaining, good show. Very unlikely enjoyable, if you will. Surprised even myself with that one. And as usual, spoilers will be aplenty. So let's get started with A Quiet Place.
What did I teach you?
You are the Duke of New York. You're a number one.
You will not laugh. You will not cry. You will learn by the numbers. I will teach you.
Can you dig it?
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
That spawn of Satan.
Oh, really?
The Force will be with you, always.
One of the movies I want to talk about today is A Quiet Place. This is a film I've seen, I think, about a month or two ago. Kind of, again, snuck in there quietly, no pun intended. It is technically a horror sci-fi, you can call it. It's a, apocalyptic view of a world now where these creatures are roaming the land, and the only way for people to be able to live or get away from them is to be completely silent. Hence, most of the movie takes place, with this family that we are watching, how they communicate with each other quietly, and how sometimes when this quiet is broken, these creatures attack, and all the perils that they go through. The film is directed by John Krasinski, who is better known for his role of Jim in The Office. He's done a number of films after that, and it could best be described as a quiet, again, here we go again, sleeper. You go through all these different situations where, right off the bat in the beginning of the film, they suffer a devastating loss due to, breaking that rule, accidentally making a noise that triggers a horrific death in the family, and how the family continues to cope through it. Now, through the film and through the other characters in the family, we start to learn, about these situations where, he has one daughter who is deaf, which is kind of like weird, or ironically weird, because yes, she can't hear anything, and you kind of wish, well, if these creatures couldn't hear anything, then things would be a lot different. But because of her condition, she has to wear a hearing aid that malfunctions most of the time, during the film, until a point where, we do get the resolution of the film, slightly bittersweet, but it's because of this hearing aid that she has that they are able to then figure out a way of disrupting the hearing of the creatures enough to be able to figure out a way of fighting back. It's a smart film, and it gives you scenarios where you haven't really seen before of how to be creatively, aggressive towards these creatures within the rules of what you're dealing with. Now, granted, yes, if you really get to it, all the different kind of sounds that could be made are just too many, you would figure, to be able to survive this kind of a creature. Granted, this is taking place out in the woods, so they do have cover in terms of, you have natural sounds that can kind of damper some of the things that they're doing. Most of the film, they're walking around barefoot because they're trying to keep it as quiet as possible, and they're even laying out, I think, sand or something like sand on the ground or in certain areas of the house to make the steps even quieter than normal. Now, the big issue in the film is that his wife is pregnant, and she will be delivering this kid, and that this is just a bomb waiting to go off, a screaming newborn. And, you do get again, very smart resolutions to how to solve some of these problems. And this could best be described as a sleeper. It's a small horror film that works. I would say similar to Get Out. It's a small horror film that works, that is smart, that is they figured out, how to do it. So I strongly recommend this one. Because of its nature, it is full of jump scares, which are usually triggered by sound, obviously, because this is what this movie is all about. Definitely pick it up on DVD. If you are a suspense horror film fan, this one, you're going to remember this one. And I'm pretty sure everybody's chomping at the bits to see if they're going to make some sort of a sequel to it, because, you know, you gotta. Now, the next film I want to also briefly talk about is Avengers Infinity War. Now, I can't really devote the amount of time that a film like this deserves in terms of, because it is bringing together so many elements of all of these Marvel films into one big one. I don't have the time or the knowledge to be able to give it its proper due. However, and I always say this, from a non-comic book fan of these sort of films. In other words, my main interest is in the films. I am aware of the comic book history, obviously, of what this whole thing comes from. And all these great films we've been seeing in the last, 10, 15 years. However, my initial entry into them has always been the films. The best way that I can rate this film is probably the best of the Avenger films. I know that there's this huge, I don't want to call it a blowback, because people are happy with the film. They're just not happy, entirely happy with the ending. But again, I don't think you need to be a super comic book nerd to understand that this is a cliffhanger, that this is, as I like to call it, it's the Empire Strikes Back of Avenger films, possibly of all Marvel films. I think they purposely left you hanging. And again, we do spoilers here. We try to review these films or talk about them way after they've been on the circuit out there, so that by the time you listen to this, hopefully you'll have seen it already. But, okay, so you have a new bad guy that's been teased about for quite a number of films now. And understandable, he is one of these big baddies of the Marvel Universe that eventually was going to kind of rear his ugly head. And in this particular one, we are still kind of dealing with the aftermath, not only of Age of Ultron, but we're also dealing with the aftermath of Civil War. We do have a divided Avenger force out there that, because of the events of those films, they're not a cohesive unit. Some of them are not around. And as this new attack takes place, it does start to bring people together from different corners of the universe in terms of, where Thor left off, where the Hulk left off, Spider-Man's over here, Tony Stark's over there. Eventually Captain America comes back. Black Panther's in the mix because, he's taking care of Bucky right now. So it's the battle of the network stars of Marvel films, because it purposely goes beyond the normal roster of even the Avengers. So they are bringing a lot of characters. And in a way, this is a kind of dangerous film to make, I think, because one of the things that keeps the Marvel film successful, in my opinion, is that they're able to separate and give you different flavors of the rainbow that is the Avengers. So in other words, for example, you want serious, comic bookish, and even more serious tones, you go to your Winter Soldiers and your Civil Wars and your Avengers, even your Iron Mans, stuff like that. You want to go into the fantastic, otherworldly, magical realms, you go to your Thors, you go to your Doctor Strange. There's a place for that otherworldly things. You want to go towards your more kid-friendly environments, you go to your Guardians of the Galaxy, your Ant-Man. Now, with that said, yes, they do kind of dip into other areas. Don't get me wrong, they do that. But primarily, the overall tone of this kind of is able to stay separate. This way you cater to your different audience, which is something that DC hasn't been able to do. DC has gone dark from the beginning, and it continues to go dark, and they can't seem to get out of that funk, which I don't mind that much, but that is one of the main differences, I think, with Marvel. So in this film, I think it was potentially dangerous to be able to mix all these characters, because you are mixing tones. Guardians of the Galaxy, they're kind of a very light, they do serious stuff, but overall the tone is very funny and light. Bringing them in here was potentially dangerous. Thor even, especially after Ragnarok. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Ragnarok. It's probably my favorite Thor film, but it's a definite change of gears. Thor was a more fantastical, serious kind of film franchise, at least, the ones they had before. But with Thor, Ragnarok, they switched gears. They went to the comedic side. They brought it more towards the Guardians and Ant-Man side, I think, which worked perfectly. I absolutely loved it. So here you're mixing these two kind of flavors of Marvel films, and it is probably why they decided to mix Thor with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Their story is kind of together, and it kind of makes sense. You have them kind of riff on each other while they're still under the umbrella of a more serious film. Spider-Man and Tony continue to be this mentor, master relationship. He's still learning from Tony, and Tony, still taking care of him in a way. But then you have the interaction between Doctor Strange and Tony, which kind of is probably the key to this film in terms of figuring out how to get out of this mess that they put themselves in. You do have Captain America and Bucky and the Black Panther and his entire country really involved in this war too against Thanos. So you have them kind of playing a role in this too. There's a lot of pieces. There's a lot of chess pieces on the board. You have the Vision, Scarlet Witch, and you just cannot go through the roster here because they have just about everybody, almost everybody in this film. Now, when it's all said and done, spoiler alert, most of these characters die, which completely floored everybody. Thanos gets his last Infinity Stone, and he's able to, as per his plan, create peace in the galaxy by killing half the galaxy. And that's how the formula kind of goes. As the battle is over and he puts the thing on, boom, people start disappearing, and it's a very sad, very dramatic and shocking thing. Most of your characters, Spider-Man is dead, and everybody, Black Panther's dead, and just about everybody drops dead in this film. Just they disappear. They turn into ash. Now, I don't think it's a big deal. Now, granted, like I said before, I'm not the biggest comic book fan, but I do know enough to know that this is basically a cliffhanger. It's a cliffhanger that's going to bring us into the continuation of this film, which I still don't understand why or how, we were supposed to have an Infinity War Part 1 and Infinity War Part 2. Then they retitled it Infinity War, and I guess Part 2 will not be a Part 2, but they'll just give it a completely different title. I guess for creative, artistic reasons or whatever. They don't want to have Part 1, Part 2s on these things. They want to differentiate them somehow, even though we've had, Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3, they've done the number thing already. But I guess after Iron Man 3, maybe they realized, we have to give these subtitles instead of names, because subtitles instead of numbers, because when you give it a number, it just kind of becomes repetitive, and it's a trope of a sequel, that kind of thing. So by giving it a name, it implies it's like a different chapter of a book that has a certain theme. I guess, I don't know, but that's what I'm thinking about. They had a pretty creative, somewhat expected stinger at the end where Nick Fury and another character, they start to disappear, but right before he disappears, he triggers some kind of a beeper or communication device that he's calling for help somehow. And the symbol is the Captain Marvel symbol, which is one of these upcoming properties that they're actually shooting it right now, I believe. So they give you they throw you a bone there with this is a new character. This is how things is going to be resolved. However, most likely the resolve point for this story will have to do more with Tony Stark and Doctor Strange, because Doctor Strange at one point in the film says, I've looked at all the different scenarios, and, there's like a 1 in a 16 million chance that this could work. And for whatever reason, he had asked Thanos to spare Tony. So the speculation is that because his only wish in order to give up his particular Infinity Stone was to save Tony, that's, I think, his ace, up his sleeve, is that Tony is the key somehow to making this right. And that's what I'm thinking of. I've seen some stuff on the internet based on the comics about how, yes, this has happened, and this is a story that's been told already. People have seen this story, and yes, you do have a cliffhangery beginning to a story where everybody's, almost everybody's dead, and then you've got to have to figure out how to bring everybody back, and that's what they're going to do, and that's what they have done already, more or less, because from what I understand, this thing's been shot already. They might be doing some tweaks here or there, but this movie is ready to go, and it's on the slate for next year. I believe they said they shot it. They shot them back to back. They just done, most of the actors weren't sure what's going to show up first, what's going to show up second, but now I guess everybody has a pretty good idea of what they're dealing with. But yeah, this movie is, it's record-breaking how much money it's making, and very positive, very entertaining, very, very funny at points. And that's I think the best thing about this film, not just the fact that it's a good Avenger film, like I said, my favorite one so far, but it was able to blend the two flavors, the two styles, even the magical stuff. I mean, again, it is Avengers. They have to bring everybody in the mix. But my biggest concern was going to be, how do you throw Guardians of the Galaxy in the mix? And how do you throw, even Thor in the mix at this point? How do you keep them, straight and serious, which they don't have to really. They could do both at the same time, and they've just proved it. They were able to do it. Now, we do have some stuff coming up. Ant-Man and the Wasp I think might be the next one, because they've been promoting that one already. Trailers are going left and right. So, and he also didn't show up in this film. Neither did Hawkeye. There are a few characters that never made it to this film. So they're possibly saving them for the next one. Maybe that's what's left of the team that they have to bring out to somehow, make things right again. I know there's a lot of backlash against Star-Lord because, he almost got Thanos' glove off at one point, but then he decided not to because he was distracted or focusing on trying to get Gamora, his vengeance for his girlfriend. And you know what? It's all part of that drama. It's all part of the mix. So everybody calm down. Don't worry about it. I'm sure, and everybody's saying this, they did not just flush half the MCU down the toilet. There's money to be made here. I imagine 80% of these characters are all coming back. They will get rid of some. There is the possibility that everybody who died before the gauntlet was fully formed is still dead. There's a possibility that, a lot of these early on characters are dead. But I can assure you, I'm pretty sure that most of these that disappeared because of the stones, they are going to be back. I don't know if they're going to wait till the last second of the next film, or it's going to be something that, builds up and then halfway through the movie, they're able to reconstitute themselves and that sort of thing. But it is coming. I'm pretty certain of that, especially since most of these actors have multiple picture contracts and they're not going to flush down the toilet, especially with Black Panther that was such a huge hit this past year. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. So here you are, you have two films, very different. One is a small sleeper sci-fi horror, and the other one is a action-adventure comic book, mega blockbuster. So, you got both of them. I'm sure they're going to be on DVD soon, and especially with Avengers, I don't think I have to convince anybody to go take a look at that, especially if you follow this podcast.
Television is not the truth. Television is an amusement park. Television is a circus, a carnival, a traveling troupe of acrobats, storytellers, dancers, singers, jugglers, sideshow freaks, lion tamers, and football players. We're in the boredom-killing business.
All right, the next thing I want to talk about is Lost in Space, the new Netflix series. Now, granted, I was aware, obviously, of the fact that we had a 1960s Lost in Space television series created by Irwin Allen, also well known for his disaster films later on. But to me, the original Lost in Space was kind of out there in the peripheral. It was something that I was aware that existed, but it was something that I really wasn't that interested in really watching. I might have seen clips of it here or there, and it just looked pretty hokey to me. Now, I know I probably didn't give it a chance. I didn't give it a shot like I did with Star Trek. Star Trek was kind of around that era, and, I'm a huge fan of Star Trek. But with Lost in Space, I really didn't care much. I know that, later on I realized that Bill Mumy was the Will, and later on he was in Babylon 5, which was a huge show that I loved at the time. And it was like, oh, he's a guy who used to be on another sci-fi show. Interesting. And I knew about Dr. Smith. Primarily, I remember back from the late 80s, early 90s, I think listening to Howard Stern and how would they make fun of Dr. Smith and the way that he would deliver lines. They would play clips of him all the time, and it would sound really, really weird and creepy. And then if you watch if I watch some scenes, he does kind of creepy old guy, but I guess that's the portrayal that you get, at that time, of the time of the evil, mustache twirling type of bad guy, not a very sophisticated. And I knew that Robbie the Robot was kind of the robot, and he was more or less a derivative of maybe Fantastic Planet, that type of design of robot. He put a guy in a very bulky, bulbous kind of robotic suit to, so he doesn't look too cheesy, too 50s robot cheesy. But yeah, I understood that, it did exist, and it's a family that is lost in space, and they have a friendly robot to help them, and an evil doctor that they're not aware of, and, yada, 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 that sort of thing. So I think it was in the mid to late 90s, a movie came out, which was an actual film based on the Lost in Space characters, and William Hurt and some other, people were in it. The movie apparently didn't make too much money. It wasn't a hit. It was somewhat of a flop, I guess. I think I actually got it on DVD for some reason. Maybe it was around the time where I started buying DVDs, and that might have been one of my freebies that I remember I could get. When you collect enough proof of purchases, you can then trade it in for a freebie film. And Lost in Space, I think, was one of the ones I got. I watched it. It was all right. It was kind of forgettable, kind of like, oh, okay, great. All right, next. It was one of those scenarios. But then all of a sudden, recently, we got a heads up that Netflix was going to be producing a, short-run series for Lost in Space. Now, with Netflix, obviously, we're used to it. It's a different format. It's a really different format if you think about it, because, we've already gotten used to the British model of the 12-episode series, but sometimes they go even less now. They go 10 episodes, just like they did with Lost in Space. And for this, I did see a couple of trailers here or there, which was like, oh, that's interesting. And, it's more modern, obviously, but the way that the story is told, it's very interesting from a writing perspective of how they're unveiling the story. The story is already that they are in some kind of perilous scenario already. And as you start to learn about this scenario that they're in, you do get these flashbacks of how they got into that situation. So, as usual, spoilers are going to be pretty heavy here. In this particular scenario that we're dealing with, you have the family that happens to find themselves in a spaceship, a small kind of spaceship, let's say, because they had just either evacuated or left a bigger spaceship, and they more or less crash land into this planet that is somewhat inhospitable. The area they're in is a very cold area. And as we go through these episodes, every episode is like some kind of life dangerous situation that they have to encounter and resolve as a family. We focus basically on the family at first, and then little by little we start to learn about these other survivors that are in the planet. One of them is West, which is an ongoing character, from the original concept of the show. And another one is Dr. Smith, again, another concept, original from the show, and how these three stories are kind of starting to link together, and eventually they all kind of find each other. And the boy, the younger kid, in the group, he befriends a robot, and that robot, he kind of saves his life. So the robot, it would seem as if he's indebted to the boy and becomes connected to this boy. But then as they progress in the story, they find more survivors of whatever the heck it is that happened. And through these flashbacks, then we start to kind of flesh out the family. We know that the family itself, the Robinsons, ironic title, the Robinsons, I guess that's harkens back to Robinson Crusoe, I guess. They're a a blended family, and they're also a somewhat dysfunctional family. The parents are either divorced or separated. They're about to be divorced, but they're all kind of entering this, I don't want to call it a lottery, but and I don't want to call it a contest. It's like this, these trials they have to go through in order to qualify to be able to be shipped out into a different planet, because the Earth is very polluted and somewhat uninhabitable. And little by little, depending on your scores, on your intelligence scores and all kinds of scores, they try to figure out whether or not you qualify to, be in one of these trips. And more or less everybody is set except for the young boy. The young boy apparently doesn't get the good enough grades to qualify, and they're going to not allow him to go. But the mother kind of rigs things up a little bit, because she is involved in a lot of this scientific stuff of prepping for this flight. So she gets him in. So that's kind of like this little secret they have going on through the story, that the boy never really qualified. Then we learn about Dr. Smith, who is just some kind of wacky sister of somebody who, the richer, more stable sister is about to go on the trip. And the wacky one is meeting with her, and she's kind of going over all the crazy things she's done, and what a black sheep of the family she is. And the other sister is like, yeah, I'm going to leave soon. I want to just kind of let bygones be bygones, and I'm going to give you everything that I own. You can have my house, you can have my car, you can have everything, because I won't need it anymore. I won't be here. It's all yours. And she's like, oh, that's great, wonderful, but little do we realize at the time, or little does she realize, that she drugs her and takes this identity chip from her arm and implants her into her arm, because she wants to be the one that leaves Earth and leaves her sister kind of tied up in the house. She doesn't kill her or anything, at least as far as we can tell. And then that's how she's able to sneak into the ship. However, while she's on the ship, eventually she gets caught. And all of a sudden, we have a sequence where we start to learn about what actually went wrong on this ship, where there's explosions, and there's apparently some sort of an attack from some kind of alien spacecraft. And there's a boarding that takes place, and there's a robot that looks a lot like the Will's robot attacking everyone and shooting everyone, killing people, and this and that. So people start to evacuate that ship in some shape or form, and a lot of these little, I don't want to call them escape pods, because they're really ships. They're actual ships attached to the larger main ship that's supposed to take everybody out to this other planet. Anyway, all these little ships escape, a lot of explosions happen, and that's how we find ourselves in this planet, marooned out there. But like I said, little by little, we start to learn that other survivors have also landed on that planet. The ship also gets kind of catapulted into another area. It almost falls through like a wormhole or something that's formed. I'm not sure if it has to do with the aliens, probably, maybe, I don't know. But that's the other point, is that they're really far away from anything that's known to them. So through the series, we start to learn, again, a lot more about these characters. And eventually we also learn that the reason why there was this initial attack on the station, on that main ship, had to do with some cargo they were holding, having to do with alien technology. So now you start to make this connection of, okay, well, these alien robots, or whatever they are, they didn't just come out of nowhere. They probably came to get something back that was stolen or found or something that, the Earth ship was keeping quiet. The robot also, when Will rescues the robot, because the robot is kind of broken, and the robot in its natural form has a completely different shape. It walks on 2 feet, but it has 4 arms, and it's very spidery looking kind of thing. But then when Will rescues the robot, saves him, the robot then saves Will, and the robot kind of takes a different shape. He takes more like a human shape. And that's how he goes through most of the series, in that shape. It's not until he goes a little nuts that the robot changes back into this spider-like motif. And we do get a lot of, again, with the family, all the little quirks of the kids. There's one girl, there's 2 girls, teenager and a little later teenager. One girl is African-American, which I guess it's implied that it had something to do with another relationship the mother probably had. Or the father, I'm not entirely sure exactly. They're very vague about that. They don't go into much detail as to what's that about. The young boy, which we talked about earlier, is Will. The mother and the father, they're estranged. The father is like a military guy. The mother is a scientist. And we do learn that, Professor Smith, or Dr. Smith, really, she's not a doctor. She just took the identity card from a person that was hurt on the ship. And she took it and ran with it and left the guy there probably to die. Ironically, that actor was played by Bill Mumy, the original Will. So that's a cute little nod. The Professor Smith is a woman in this series as opposed to a man in the original series. So they're kind of flipping it a little bit. They're giving you a more modern take. The fact that you do have an African-American character as part of the family, again, makes it a little more modern. The series is funny because it kind of seems to jump back and forth. And that's one of the things that made it very attractive to me was that at times it's very serious and it's very deadly serious. And at times it kind of falls back into a more easy family kind of show. And I hope they can continue kind of riding the line here between those two, because if you go too much in the family side, it can turn into a little bit of a hokey kind of show. Obviously, the more serious they go, the more I'm interested in it because, I like that sort of thing. But I think they're doing a very good job. And yes, every episode is a cliffhangery situation where, oh my God, how do we get out of this one? But it works, it kind of works. And it's still interesting. It keeps it interesting. And by the time we get to the end of this first season, we get to a point where they get separated completely from the rest of those survivors. The main ship is found in orbit, and they're able to evacuate almost everybody, more or less, except the ones that died on the original crash. But they get separated, and now we have this scenario where now they are more like where we're used to. As far as when you think of the original series, now they are officially lost in space because they have been separated from the main group. And that's where the next season will take us, which they have announced already. There's definitely a season 2. This was a very successful show. It is, again, very family friendly. You can, we watched it with my daughter. I don't know if my son is done watching it, but it is that type of show. I don't want to say it's in the same realm as Stranger Things, but it kind of, even though it's a different subject matter, this is sci-fi, like heavy sci-fi, as opposed to horror sci-fi, for Stranger Things. It is that kind of show where there is enough of everything else in this show to satisfy, your younger kids, your teenagers, let's say, and your adult sci-fi fans. So I definitely recommend it. Like I said, the serious aspects of the show reminded me a little bit of Battlestar Galactica, the reboot. Oh my God, there's some really dark things in here, that kind of thing where obviously Galactica stayed dark for the majority of the show, but here they're giving you enough of a peek at this darkness, whether it's the people that get hurt, people that die, the robot, the initial attack, Dr. Smith's evil nature, what really happened with that initial attack? Who is responsible? What is this thing they were hiding that the robot came after? There's all these little elements, all these other people that, they're kind of losing it because of, the stress they're under. The introduction of West, which is the other character that's not a family member, but he's kind of like a regular on the show because he's part of their group. He's a completely different kind of, I could picture, he's like the Han Solo of the group. He's a rough and tumble, kind of no nonsense, doesn't give a crap about anything kind of guy. And he does have some of those qualities, but they kind of make it different. And he's a little different. He's different enough to be good. Let's put it that way. He's the guy who doesn't care about anything, but he really does care about stuff. And he's a bit of a scoundrel, no pun intended. He's a little shady, but as opposed to Dr. Smith. And the fact that, they made Dr. Smith a woman here makes it also different, unusual different, uncomfortable different, because you're really not used to seeing a villain portrayed by a woman on a lot of these things. It's usually, the mustache twirling baddie. That's the traditional bad guy. But here, she's also pretending to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So it's kind of like, yeah, she can kind of get away with that, even though by the end of this, we kind of understand, and I think most people realize now that she's just full of crap. She's just a wacko who's out for herself. And at this point, she just wants to be able to control that robot. But like I said, there's plenty for everybody. The effects are phenomenal. I mean, lately they've done so much good work with special effects in a lot of these shows, and this one, it's cinematic. The scenery, the locations, they really went out of their way, to do it in the forest, in the snow, all these different locations that give it a cinematic look. So this is one that not only do I recommend, but we are kind of like waiting for season 2 now, which is going to take a while, similar to Stranger Things. We're like, I can't wait for them actually to, give us a second one. And, definitely recommend it as a family viewable show. All right, another Netflix show that I want to talk about is Cobra Kai. And I have here with me my wife, Kim, who is going to give us a little bit of her perspective and a little background on the show. Now, this kind of came out of nowhere. I don't know if they were promoting it a long time ago, but all of a sudden I started to see some news feed articles that they were going to do something like this. Now, some of the stars of the show and the movies actually have been showing up on the convention circuit for a while now. And I don't know if anybody really had a heads up about it, people that were going to conventions. I know you saw them, right?
Yeah, I was looking forward to it. And I'm trying to remember now. I've been to so many conventions in the past couple of years. I'm trying to remember which one it was at. It couldn't have been New York. It might have been Orlando.
Possible,
MegaCon?
But it might have been something that was pretty currently, in the works. Or at least they kind of kept quiet about it and were able to put it out there at a certain time when they had it all, ready to go. A lot of times, we hear so much of all these projects that almost happened and never end up happening, but this is a bizarre one. The show is more or less I don't want to call it a sitcom, and it's not really a drama. It's somewhere between a drama and a comedy, because it does kind of ride the line there, which is very different in tone than, let's say, the movies. Now, let's talk a little bit about the movies, because the movies were pretty much straight dramas as far as I can remember.
Yeah, they had a little comedy to them, but not like this.
Yeah. Kim, why don't you tell us a little bit about the movies, like how many were there and how were they different and, that kind of thing.
There were, technically, I believe there were 4. I only saw 3 of them. The 4th one just didn't interest me. I think it was a girl, and I guess I just wanted to see more of Daniel LaRusso, so I think that's why I didn't bother with it. The first one is a real classic. I loved that movie. It didn't hurt that I loved Ralph Macchio back then, but it was, the movie itself was different. The relationship between Mr. Miyagi and Daniel LaRusso was a really sweet, fun, honest one. And then the Karate Kid 2, they went to Japan, to Okinawa, which I loved because I used to take karate. I used to teach karate.
But not when Karate Kid 2.
Not then, but when I look back and I had since seen the movies again, it's fun to watch. And again, even with this series, there are a lot of karate arts that came out of Japan and out of Okinawa, including Ishinryu, which is the art that I was involved in. And seeing the traditions and seeing Okinawa was pretty cool to me. But Daniel LaRusso had a new girlfriend in this one. He was involved in a lot of the Japanese traditions, and that was fun. Karate Kid 3 didn't do much for me. I don't even remember a lot of the premise of it, to be perfectly honest.
Well, the first one is obviously the big one, because I think it even was nominated for a few Academy Awards here or there. And the director was the same directors from Rocky, I believe. So he did have a kind of pedigree of being able to do these sportsy kinds of underdog kind of movies. So there was definitely that kind of a feel to it that appealed to a lot of people. I do remember the first one specifically. I don't remember if I saw it in the theater. I must have definitely seen it on HBO a number of times. But like you said, they made these 4 films. The 4th one was, again, they switched it. I think it was a girl, like you said. And then they remade it. They kind of tried rebooting it with a younger kid. What was it, Will Smith's kid or something like that?
I saw that. And it was fine. It was okay. It was an enjoyable movie. I had a hard time getting past the fact that it was called Karate Kid, but they were really doing Kung Fu, I believe. So yeah, it was in China, and that's Japanese is Kung Fu, karate is Japanese. So I guess I don't know why they decided to do that rather than just keep it straight karate. But
well, for a pretty long time, the idea of the Karate Kid kind of disappeared from everybody's radar, up until this remake they made a few years ago. But like I mentioned earlier, they did go on the convention circuit. Most of the main actors did not find any traction beyond, those 80s films. Ralph Macchio, his claim to fame was Karate Kid and The Outsiders. After that, or before that, there's just not too much there, like it happens to a lot of Hollywood actors.
Well, he had the benefit of, he had that youth gene, that kid-looking gene for way beyond longer than other people have it. So I think
like Michael J. Fox used to have,
And I think once that faded, maybe the roles faded too. But for the convention circuit, the one I saw, and now I'm really thinking maybe it was New York Comic Con, but the actors all seem to be having a really good time up there. I remember that. And I can't help but wonder, the chicken or the egg. Was it they're going on the convention circuit that inspired doing the show? Or were they already thinking of the show? I don't remember talk of the show.
Well, the earliest that I could find here having to do with anything with this show is apparently sometime in August of last year. YouTube announced they were going to produce a series. So it's been at least a year in the works, a little less than that. And it's unusual that they decided to go the serious route in terms of not a remake, not a reboot, not a film, not even a Netflix-y type of film, even though this is YouTube. But instead they decided to go into a limited series. Now, granted, this is the typical streaming service kind of series. Now, YouTube is not exactly streaming, but it's kind of watching something live, more or less, by clicking on it. And they do adhere to the short seasons. Like I mentioned many times before, we're no longer dealing in the 24-episode seasons. This is the similar to the British model of going for about 12. Well, here I think they go for about 10. And what's unusual is the tone of this series. The films are pretty much straight dramas, no matter how you slice it, with a little bit of comedy sprinkled into it. Here, it's kind of 50-50. They kind of go in both directions. And from the first time we saw the trailers that they were starting to premiere, you kind of had a hint already that this was going in a different direction. It almost made it look as if Johnny was the good guy and Daniel was the bad guy.
Well,
they flipped it a little bit on purpose to give you that thing. And as we started to watch the show, you are starting to get a different perspective of what's happened to these characters many, many years later, 30-some years later or more. And they are purposely starting with Johnny. We kind of see Daniel's character a little later. We get to see his point of view of things a little later. And at first, it's basically Johnny is a mess. He used to be the bully karate star of his dojo, and now he is a washed up electrician, more or less, that loses his job because of his temper and people. And he's got a stepfather that kind of hates him, and he's divorced. He has an estranged son. His wife is a mess. His life is a complete disaster. And as a result of all of these things kind of colliding at the same time, he gets into a car accident that happens to have a passenger that is Daniel's daughter. So his car gets towed to Daniel's lot, and he just flips out because he can't stand them. He still blames them for everything. And that's what kind of gets the ball rolling on this series.
I have to say, look, I did not expect much from this series. I was kind of wincing over the fact that they were making it because, everything is coming back. And while there are shows that I do enjoy coming back, sometimes I think they're overdoing it. So I was really surprised to find how much I liked. I actually loved this show. They've done something with it in that combination of drama and comedy that is kind of a gift to people our age, the ones that loved the original movies. Now we can appreciate it in a different vein. as adults. And you look at the reality in it where, okay, Daniel LaRusso was trod upon as a kid. He comes out shining now as this owner of multiple locations for a car dealerships. Johnny, who was Mr. Rich Kid, who was beaten up on him, becomes, loses in the end. And that's what you want to see in a movie. You want to see the underdog come out on top. You want to see the nasty guy be vanquished. But here you can see that, okay, yes, that's the way their lives went. Johnny has still fallen apart. The rich kid has fallen to the bottom, and Daniel is still on top. But if you look at it, they both have these good qualities and bad qualities that, due to their maturity, they've lived life. And Daniel LaRusso's life is not perfect. He's certainly not raising his son very well, it looks like. That poor kid. It's just
we kept wondering, is he really in this show? Because he's like a kind of I don't want to call it a mess, but he's just like so unlikable. And it's like he's got this perfect life. His wife, I guess there's not too much wrong with her as far as the character is formed. And really, there's really not too much wrong with him. He's a successful person that loves his family.
Right.
He doesn't have too many flaws, at least that we're being shown, other than this thing about Johnny. He sees Johnny, he flips out. He wants to confront them all the time. But he does keep himself in check. His kids, on the other hand, are a whole different issue, which is what triggers most of the conflicts that have to do with the show. His daughter starts to date the student that Johnny picks up, who's a completely different kid that has nothing to do with the mythology, let's say, of the show. He's a brand new character who lives in the same housing complex.
But he's a nod to Daniel LaRusso.
Right. He's a nice kid who gets beat up, who needs help, and Johnny takes him kind of under his wing for a combination of not all... What's the word I'm
sees
looking
him
for?
as dollar signs, as the potential
right.
for
He
dollar signs.
just wants to milk him for a little money, and then the fact that other kids come into the dojo then because of him and because of his progress with karate, he does. But at the same time, he does kind of like him, and it starts to leak through. But then we have the opposite situation happening because Johnny's son gets into the picture. We start to learn about him, and he's a complete deviant, criminal type of guy who is also trying to kind of break away. And he kind of hatches his own plan because he hates his father so much that he wants to hurt him by getting close to Daniel and starting to work for him at the dealership and then starting to train with him. So you have these dual trainings taking place, and they're kind of paralleling each other in complete different angles.
Well, this is what I love so much about the show, the twist in it, and the fact that I have a karate background, so I know what karate can do for a person, especially for a kid. And I love the way, in the movies, we've got wimpy new kid, poor kid, who this great karate master with a great sense of morals, a great sense of karate, classic karate, takes him under his wing and trains him up to be strong, not just strong in his moves, but strong in his mind. And then you see where Johnny Lawrence, who has everything going for him, joins this dojo with a karate master who is not what karate is all about and what happens to them. So now in the series, we've got the opposite. We've got the bad kid getting the good karate instructor, and we've got the good kid getting the bad karate instructor. So it's a twist, and you can see, and it just shows what good training can do, classic training.
Now, to further muddle things up here, Daniel's daughter, who was involved in that car accident that started everything, she all of a sudden starts to kind of date Johnny's student. So you have this combination of, it's almost like a typical sitcom-y kind of like, oh my God, I didn't know this was happening. And everybody's like, I didn't know that was happening. And eventually we get to a point in the series where everybody starts to find out what's going on. Everything just explodes. And they all go for that tournament again. That was the climax of the first film. And during that climax, this time around, and again, spoiler alert for everybody as usual, This time around, we have, again, flipping things around where Johnny's student is the one that wins, Daniel's student is the one that loses, but Johnny's still not 100% the bad guy in terms of he doesn't like the way that his own student has won, his aggressive nature. All the crap that he was taught directly by him, he's having a problem with it now.
He's having a conflict of his conscience. He's seeing that, okay, this is the result. I've done to him what was done to me.
And for Daniel, we also start to get possibly the return of his daughter getting involved in learning the karate or learning it again or getting back involved. And his new student, who is Johnny's son, also getting more involved in it this time. And him taking him to apparently another dojo that he has, like a secret dojo,
well,
I guess,
that's
which
the
is
other
Miyagi's
thing I
old
love.
place.
That's the other thing I love. The series is full of nostalgia from the movies, sometimes in serious ways, sometimes in silly ways. When Daniel shows him a move or is trying to get him to do some kind of really tough move, like he learned the crane stance into the jump kick, which he uses at the end of the tournament in Karate Kid 1, he's telling his student now about Robbie, telling him about a move that he himself could never master. And then Robbie, he learns it. So it's things like that. And then, of course, when Robbie gets hurt in the tournament and his shoulder has been damaged, he's like, I don't think I can fight. And Daniel says, yes, you can. Well, we're going to take care of this. And you see him slam his hands together and start to rub them together, which, if you remember in Karate Kid 1, Miyagi fixed his leg. So you think that, oh, wow, he must have passed that down to Daniel and he's going to fix his shoulder. Instead, no, he just goes, he basically calls for emergency services, right?
Yeah, he calls the doctor to come and like tape him up or something.
He's like, well, we'll take care of this. But
yeah, the actors, again, the only really known actors are your main characters, which is Ralph Macchio and William Zabka, who plays Johnny. Obviously, Mr. Miyagi has died many years ago. You can't bring him back. Elizabeth Shue is still alive, but for some reason they couldn't get her, I guess, to do the show or something.
Yeah, well, they say what happened to her
character. They do talk about her, that she
character.
did marry someone else, so they're not at least killing her off. You never know. If the show gets popular, she might make an appearance.
I want to know what happens to the girlfriend, what happened to the girlfriend in Karate Kid 2. What was her name? Kiku?
Oh, well, maybe do they even mention it in Karate Kid 3? What happened to her? Who knows?
I'm trying to remember.
You never know.
Now.
Again, when these things become popular, all of a sudden people that normally would want nothing to do with it might get interested. Mm-hmm. Now, the hook at the end of the show is that as Johnny goes back to the dojo, I guess to kind of celebrate quietly, which he's not very happy about, all of a sudden Kreese shows up, which is the guy that used to train him. It was his sensei, let's say, from Karate Kid.
The original, no.
Right. Played by Martin Kove, who I guess is interested in doing the show. And he kind of pulls like a Luke Skywalker in Force Awakens. He shows up at the last minute to kind of throw the hook. And the hook is that he's back and he's, in my opinion, he is going to get involved in this somehow.
Should we talk our theories?
My theory is that because he's using the name Cobra Kai, Johnny's using Cobra Kai, doesn't belong to him. So this guy, who is the real owner of Cobra Kai, let's say, is going to pull some kind of legal maneuver where he has to make him a partner or else he would sue him and shut him down or something of that nature. I think he's going to weasel his way into the show. So obviously he's there for that.
And I think he's going to weasel his way in, but I think that very shortly after he does that, I'm wondering if Johnny will turn tail and somehow he and Daniel will join forces and train together, kids together against Cobra Kai. I don't know.
Right. I mean, you have Robbie, which is Johnny's son, and you have Miguel, which is Johnny's trainee, let's say.
Right.
So you have those two kids.
And you've got a lot of formerly sweet kids in Cobra Kai that he basically turned into little beasts. So I wonder what happens to them.
Now, again, the weird thing about the show is that if you were to read to me this script or this idea, it shouldn't work.
Right.
It sounds horrible on paper, I think. And the fact that it works, I cannot still figure it out why it works. It's hokey. it's cheesy, and it works. So it's like, what is it? I can't figure it out.
It's a combination. It's nostalgia. It's actually, I'd be curious to see how somebody that's, I don't know, 14, 15 years old suddenly watches this. I don't know if they would care.
Yeah,
I don't think
it probably wouldn't make sense. I think it would be like, what the hell is this?
I mean, even if they watched Karate Kid 1 and 2, would it still mean anything to them?
Well, I'll tell you something off the bat. According to some of the numbers I've been seeing, the amount of people that have been watching this show for a sort of like a streaming service is much higher than premieres of some of the Netflix shows, including Lost in Space. They got way, way bigger numbers than they ever expected, and it's the biggest show that YouTube, I mean, granted, it's YouTube. YouTube Red is kind of new still. They do have their own programming, but nobody knows anything about it, and it kind of blew those numbers out of the water.
Yeah, it's nostalgia. We like to see things, people in their, late 30s to into 50s like to see their favorite stuff come back. And when they do that by throwing some of the nostalgia in and by giving you twists, it works, I think. I think it works.
Yeah. So they definitely already, we know that there's a second season coming. They've approved it right. I mean, they probably approved it the second these things started airing. Right now, I believe YouTube has the first 2 episodes up for grabs for anybody who wants to see. And then you got to subscribe to Red, which leaves you other options if you know how to find them. Or with Red, you can subscribe for, I think, 30 days, and then you can stop. That's a you can test out the channel. So if you want, you could do that. You can just, it's only 10 episodes. So you really think you're only dealing with 8 episodes that you have to watch on your own. And obviously something like this, just like in Netflix and some of these other shows, I'm sure by the time the second season is ready to go, they'll put them on DVD and they'll put them in, for rentals somewhere for people to watch. Because all of a sudden they have a hit on their hands, an unexpected hit.
So who's your favorite character in this?
I think I like Johnny because he's just so different than what you expect. Daniel is basically the person you know the most because you already knew his story ahead of time. But with Johnny, you are finding out about ex-wives, stepfather that's pretty mean guy, how he got involved with Cobra Kai in the first place, all that stuff, all that stuff that was happening at home that really drove him in that direction. And the fact that he's teetering, trying to, every time, and again, it's a trope, it's predictable, but every time that he and Daniel would kind of start to agree on something would just explode and make them all go back in their own corners. Because obviously you can't have them agreeing too much. You need that conflict, at least in this first season. And like you said, it is possible that with the second season, that's going to provide them with a reason or an opportunity to be able to kind of focus on another bad guy, if you will, which most likely is going to be this other the old sensei from his actual dojo.
One other thing that I find is really relatable is the way Daniel had to, his own little dojo in his house, he had to clear it out again. Because as much as he was into that and as much as karate is still a part of his life because he was on the board for the All Valley competition, right? Life gets in the way, like his business, his kids, his family. You could see everything kind of, I guess, life got in the way. And so now he's going back to his karate roots. He's pulling it out. He's remembering what Miyagi taught him. And I think that's pretty cool because how many of us, in our 40s are, look back on, wish I could get back into this or get back into that.
Well, the other thing I want to mention is also that there is another character that showed up, which is his mom, who was played,
yes,
I guess,
I love
by
her.
the original actress.
Do.
They brought her back. So that was kind of cute to bring her back in the mix. I still don't understand it. I don't know if it's done on purpose or it's just a badly written character, but his son, I think his son is so ignored. Not ignored, but I can't understand his son being such a jerk.
He doesn't
in that family that is such a perfect kind of family.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why this has such a realistic kind of tone to it. Because if you look at it, I mean, the daughter, supposedly he was teaching her karate until she was like, 9 or 10 or something.
Yeah, and she got involved with the Heathers of the group of the high school.
But she was good. And I cannot wait to see her in action next season. I come from a karate school where most of the senseis were female and a lot of the students. So to me, it's exciting. And it was also weird to see one female in Cobra Kai.
Because they're taking like all the outcasts. He's taking, and granted that at first he's got way more, but he gets rid of so many. And the thing about his character is that he's a jerk, but he's an unapologetic jerk. He's basically everything.
Oh, he's racist.
Every stereotypical thing
awful.
You can think of, he is that character. He's like Clint Eastwood at El Torino. Like you said, sexist, racist, you name it, he's there. Then also on top of that, to give you that nostalgic thing, he's kind of stuck in the 80s also. He's listening to the music. He doesn't seem to be too up to date with technology, even though he's an electrician and he's installing televisions, but at the same time, he doesn't even know what a smartphone is or something like that at some point. So it's like, he's somebody that got stuck more or less at a certain period and never kind of left that period.
What my point was with his son is apparently the daughter had taken an interest in karate, and that's something so important to him. So I guess he spent a lot of time with her. And the younger son just seems to sit on the couch and play video games.
Yeah, but I never got the impression that he's reacting to, like, the son is angry at him for him paying too much attention to the daughter. I think the son's just a little jerk. He's like a little jerk.
Maybe he'll join the karate dojo, Miyagi-Do.
Who knows?
In the next season, get a little firmed up and, work out a bit.
So we'll see.
Change his outlook on life.
Yeah, we'll see which way this goes. I mean, it was definitely a good start to a series. And again, the type of formula that they've selected in the past, when somebody tells you about it, it doesn't work. There have been many shows, or many movies really, that they try to reboot. And they kind of take them off a little bit to the side. Like, for example, Starsky and Hutch used to be a cop show. They then did a reboot movie that was a comedy. And you figure that would have been enough to give people a fresher look at it, but it completely flopped to go from drama to comedy. Here, you have a similar situation, but again, like I said before, somehow it works, and it still baffles me why it works.
Yeah, I think the key is the mix between nostalgia and making the characters mature a bit, so they kind of have grown with you. And you get a glimpse into them now. You know how they were, and you get a glimpse at what they've done with their lives.
And maybe the 30-second incremental storytelling helps too, instead of giving you a 2-hour movie where you can't cram in all that information. And for 2 hours, this would look kind of cheesy. The production value would be very television-ish looking. Even if they did Netflix has its own films. They don't go to the theater, they go straight to Netflix. So here, spreading it out over 10 episodes, gives them a little more wiggle room to be able to explore, obviously, all these background stories that we never knew about, and to flesh out the newer characters that are brand new to us.
The one regret that I have about this, though, is the fact that the movies were pretty much, I don't remember what their rating was, but there wasn't a whole lot of, harsh language in those. But in this, there is. So while, our kids are old enough, it doesn't matter. If they do have an interest to watch it, fine. But I can't even, I wanted to, once I saw Daniel LaRusso doing kata, the forms and stuff that I did, I wanted to tell my sensei and my dojo, hey, tell the kids that this is on. They should watch Karate Kid, and then they can watch this series. But you really can't. Most of them, a lot of them, are much younger, and
no, this is more like a teenager, like a high school crowd type of audience.
You wouldn't sit and have your 6 or 7-year-old watch this, because the language can get pretty rough, and some of the ideas, I think, in it too.
Yeah, but
so it's overall, really made for us. It really is.
No, yeah, we are definitely the target audience, especially if you're into the 80s nostalgia, vintagey type of stuff.
Johnny Lawrence is still vintage.
So we definitely recommend this one.
Yes.
All right, I hope everybody enjoyed today's show. We jumped from one end of the spectrum with films like A Quiet Place and Avengers Infinity War, all the way to, your home viewing with Lost in Space and Cobra Kai. We took a little break today, I guess, from Star Wars because there's just so much Star Wars out there that I still want to talk about. But we had to kind of get these things out of the way because they were there and they're great and they're really definitely worth your time. But don't worry, gigantic Star Wars content coming very, very soon. Solo is right around the corner. A special thanks for Kim, my wife, for joining me today with our Cobra Kai review. So until next time, thanks for joining us, and we will see you soon here at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
For impact.
We're lost. No kidding. This is Will Robinson of the 24th Colonist Group. I'm the first human to discover evidence of an alien intelligence.
What is that?
It's okay.
Will!
He's with me.
Danger, Will Robinson.
We may not be safe here.
How long do we have?
Weeks.
Gently.
What the hell are you?
There is a rule that's written in stone. The Robinsons stick together. Be safe out there. You don't know what you might find.
John, where are you?
Who are you? It's complicated.
If you have any hope of saving your family, you will help me.
Go get our kids and get them off this planet.
If you would like to subscribe to our show, send us messages, or see video links to some of the topics we talked about today, please visit our homepage at geekfestrants.com or our YouTube channel, Facebook page, or iTunes at GeekFest Rants.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
GeekFest Rants is produced by Carlos Perón, copyright 2018.
This broadcast is part of the IC Robots Radio Network. Visit icrobots.com for this and many other nerd/nostalgia related podcasts. You won't be sorry for long.